We continue with Craig Shirley, Reagan biographer, The Last Act, his latest book, huge smash, and Matthew Continetti, who's an editor-in-chief of the Washington Free Beacon. So, Matthew, when we were taking the break, you had mentioned the issue of trade and how Trump is, I guess you were saying, in his opposition to the Trans-Pacific Partnership, that he is what? He is anti-trade or anti-free trade?
Yeah, and I think that's obvious. And it's not just Trans-Pacific Partnership. He's on the record saying he's against basically every trade agreement, at least since NAFTA in the 20 years ago. So what I'm saying is nominating him would be a seismic shift in the position of the party on the issue of trade. And I don't think many people have grappled with that. Certainly his supporters have. But my big issue is actually, I wrote the piece, Laura, to talk to Trump's critics, because so many of them don't take him seriously. They're too busy either making fun of him or dismissing him or arguing that he's going to fade over time. What I'm saying is, let's look at where Donald Trump stands on the issues, and let's recognize that if he is the nominee, which he may very well be, it means that the Republican Party itself will shift on these issues as well.
Craig, a couple things. Number one, he's, quote, anti-trade. I don't think so. I mean, I don't think that's right. I want to try to moderate this today, but I think Trump is saying we've negotiated really bad deals, and I think the facts bear that out. We have millions of jobs that have left the United States. We've had hundreds of thousands of positions just in the past 15 years displaced because of our dealings mostly with China after the WTO. We were promised all these benefits from being a member of the WTO. We heard that China was not going to become a member of the WTO. That all changed, and we had a $314 billion deficit with China last year. So I think he's probably for trade. I can't imagine someone like Trump is anti-trade, but I think he just wants smarter trade. But I think Matthew makes a good point about the establishment. Laughing off Trump has so far gotten them nothing. Craig?
Yeah. Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't know you were turning it over to me.
Yes.
Listen, it's not necessarily a bad thing that he is anti-trade as long as he sticks to the basic organizing philosophy of the Republican Party is freedom. The Republican Party has done best when it's been revolutionary and anti-establishment, whether it was from Abraham Lincoln or Teddy Roosevelt. Even Eisenhower, in his farewell address, took on the military-industrial complex, which represented the establishment in Washington. Of course, Reagan ran and then governed as anti-establishment. Might be that Trump is the Moses of the 21st century Republican Party. He's leading the party to the promised land, but he's not going to get there himself. And it might be that Ted Cruz ends up being the nominee. But the most important thing is that for the Republican Party to continue to succeed, it must be anti-establishment and it must be pro-revolution, political revolution.
And your reaction to that, Matthew?
Well, no, I think the history bears Craig out. I mean, Reagan obviously is the figure that most Republicans look to as a successful statesman in the late 20th century. I just think it is funny. I mean, the idea of revolution for a conservative party is somewhat paradoxical, but that's kind of where we are at the moment.
Is it? Is it? Why is it paradoxical? Look at what happened in 1976. Look at what happened in 1980. Look at what happened in 1964. Those are all revolutionary moments that led to, thankfully, the Soviet Union collapsing, a complete revival of youth activism on the Reagan side. I was one of them. Dinesh D'Souza, many others at my school and beyond became Reaganites in the 80s because of him. And then they went on to become judges and media figures and businessmen and doctors, and had a huge effect on the entire political debate and our life in the United States through him.
Yeah, no one denies that. I'm just speaking about how, Edmund Burke, for example, the founder of conservatism, was against the French Revolution. That's all. It's a different argument from.
No, I see your historical. Yeah, well, we're going back to the Burkean. Oh, you're going all George Will on us now.
No. I was just pointing it out more. I will say this. It's very true that Trump could be like Moses or like Goldwater, right? Because the line is, Barry Goldwater's victory didn't come until Ronald Reagan's election, 16 years later. I think Trump is pointing toward the direction of the future Republican Party. It's just, I'm saying, it's different from the Republican Party we've come to know and dislike.
One thing, Matthew, and then I want, Craig, your reaction to this. I've been saying I've been begging. I think the word begging is not an overstatement. I have literally been prostrating myself before the establishment, begging them to compromise with the people on a few issues. Just a couple steps toward the people on maybe more sensible trade deals, maybe not 5,500-page trade deals, maybe a real serious conversation about the types of people we let into the country, sealing the border, especially with the new news that 10,000 unaccompanied minors crossed the border in the last 60 days, 106% increase from the year before. But just a little bit of a respect from the establishment to the people who've made the party what it is. And instead, it's exact opposite. It's like, oh, we're going to vote for Hillary. Oh, well, Hillary. Well, obviously, if Donald Trump or Cruz are going to be, we're going right for Hillary Clinton. That's their response. So the pox on the people and a big old hug on Hillary. To me, that is just a suicidal for the establishment. I don't get that at all.
No, there's no question. And I think that the attitude of the establishment, whether it's the liberal establishment or the conservative establishment, Republican establishment, toward these populist feelings and policies that you're suggesting is what fuels, I think, a lot of the support for Trump, because they're looking at it and they're saying that both parties are corrupt, and the Republican Party, if anything, is worse off because it's not being true to its principles. And so we're going to look for alternatives outside the political process, exactly like Mr. Trump.
How many of you think that the dinner that apparently Paul Ryan and Nancy Pelosi had on, what was it, Friday night? How many of you have a lot of confidence that the outcome of that dinner is going to work out well for the people? I mean, Craig, you can chime in here, but when we hear behind closed doors, closed door session, off the record colloquy, every time we hear these phrasings, we think, okay, well, watch your wallet, because we're about to get, royally screwed again. Excuse my English at Christmas time. Go ahead.
Well, I think you're absolutely right. And I've said this before, is that culture trumps ideology. So, the Democratic Party is pretty uniform in its belief in government and power and centralized authority. The Republican Party is split and is going through yet another evolutionary phase right now to see which way it goes, in the direction of big government Bushism or back toward, Reagan populism. It remains to be seen. I think that right now is that on balance is that the odds favor the outsiders, whether it's Trump or Cruz or Carson. But that's not to say that the insiders don't behave like insiders, because they've always behaved that way. They're always more about access and money. That's why the IMF bank, which was taken out by the populist conservatives, has now been reimposed by the insiders.
Matthew, what do you think would happen if Trump, let's say he loses Iowa, he wins, he won some fairly major states, but Cruz really begins to pick up momentum. And Cruz, let's just say, just for the sake of argument, let's say Cruz can somehow win in South Carolina, which I think would be hard right now, but let's say he did. Let's say he went on and with all these proportional states picked up a good, 25%, 20% of delegates. Would he ever be acceptable to the establishment as an alternative to Trump? I mean, I think they actually could hate Cruz more than they even hate Trump.
You hear that a lot. I don't know the answer since I'm left out of the establishment. I will say I think if Cruz is the nominee, it would not be as big a shift ideologically for the Republican Party.
Why? Why?
I think he takes some things from Trump, as he said. He hugs him in public, but he's also very much, one thing he's always talking about is freedom and liberty, words that you just don't actually hear coming from Trump's mouth all that much. Trump is much more focused on winning, security. Those are his two things. So with Cruz's rhetoric, freedom, liberty, I think he would, going against Obamacare, much more vocal on the social issues than Donald Trump is, that even though Donald Trump says he's a social conservative, he doesn't emphasize those issues. So I do view Cruz as more in the tradition of the Republican Party, as much as he is anti-establishment and wants to change but definitely its strategy going forward.
Craig, Cruz has made no big mistakes in my mind in this campaign. You can close it out.
No, I absolutely agree. I think if he ends up winning this thing, is that he's going to obviously have run the most brilliant campaign strategy in many a year. I want to just say one thing, though, is disabuse your listeners of this notion that Edmund Burke is the father of American conservative. John Locke is the father of American conservatism. Burke believed in the divine right of kings. Burke believed that power flowed downward instead of upward. Burke reviled the Tom Paine, who was in many ways the voice of American conservatism. Edmund Burke is not the father of American conservatism. He's the father of British conservatism, which is vastly different than American conservatism.
Do you want to react to that at all, Matthew?
Well, Craig and I can discuss whether John Locke was a conservative or a liberal offline.
In the mold of the Enlightenment,
classical liberal,
which is the inspiration for the American conservative movement.
And this gets us into kind of some of the peccadillos and paradoxes we find ourselves today, because you have people pulling for the more Anglo-conservatism, I guess, of Edmund Burke versus people saying that John Locke, the founder of liberalism, is actually also the founder of American conservatism.
Yeah, well, I think
often quoted Paine. Reagan never quoted Burke.
No, Reagan never quoted Burke. As I was listening to his speech at the University of Virginia from 1988, December 1988, guys, because I was giving a speech down at the Virginia Republican Party event over the weekend down in at the Homestead, and he just always went back to talking about the American people. Really interesting comments about Thomas Jefferson, the need to understand what our liberty really means. So, anyway, I don't know, like I said, nothing to do with anything we're talking about. But
no, it has everything to do with it. Laura, it has everything to do with it, because Reagan believed that America operated on a higher moral plane than any other country in history. But in order to defeat the Soviet Union, you had to have an inspired citizenry so they would grow the economy and produce the war material that would force the Soviets to the negotiating table. That's why he gave so many speeches inspiring the American people, because he knew a happy people were a productive people.
And the people had to buy in to the agenda. It couldn't be just a slice of the electorate, and Matthew, you've written about this, can't be just a tiny slice of the electorate running the show for everybody else. That situation is just not going to hold. I mean, it just can't hold. You can't have a situation where the middle class hasn't gotten a raise in like 15 years. I mean, it's just not going to, that's a situation not going to work well. So they have to offer new alternatives, and doesn't mean you can't be conservative, but I just hope the party can come together. I really do. I hope they can patch it all up, and maybe that's wishful thinking. Lovely conversation just in time for our Christmas season. Matthew Continetti from the Washington Free Beacon. Love reading your stuff, Matthew. Thank you so much. And Craig Shirley, as always, here on the Laura Ingraham Show. Last act, run out and get his book. We'll take a break, close it out.